you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
If you're submitting all this personal data and the model's learning based on it, it could be learning sensitive information about you or even intuiting things that you didn't necessarily tell the model.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery.
Hi everybody, welcome to today's KirkpatrickPrice webinar. My name is Ali Krings. I'm going to be your host, and of course you can see right now we're joined with Walter Haydak of StackAware. Today we're going to be really digging into the topic of data security for generative AI. It's all about being able to answer those questions because a lot of our companies and clients, they're starting to use that artificial intelligence in their processes. So the big question is, how do we remain compliant? How do we ensure we're doing this in a smart way and keep our cybersecurity posture still standing strong? So Walter Haydak with StackAware has a wealth of information to dive into. And Walter, I know that you specialize in vulnerability management. So let's just start there. Will you walk us through a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm the founder of StackAware, which is focused on cyber risk management, specifically in the artificial intelligence space. I spent the last part of my career working in several enterprise software vendors, helping them both secure other enterprises and deliver their products and services securely. And then before that, I spent most of my career in government, in the intelligence community, and then as a Marine Corps reconnaissance and intelligence officer.
Wow. I mean, it's such an exciting place to be. And I think especially right now, where it's not just folks in the cybersecurity industry talking about AI and these generative artificial intelligence forms, but it is a hot topic for absolutely everybody using these products. So before we start digging in too deep, will you just walk us through an overview of the what and the why for the need for artificial intelligence and how we might be using that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the past 6 months have seen an explosion in conversation about generative artificial intelligence, which is a subset of the broader category that focuses on creating new content from existing content. And the core technology at the center of this revolution in generative AI are large language models, which essentially are, at their core, a means of predicting a series of words given a prompt or given an input. And they've really progressed quite rapidly to the point where they can give you an extensive output of words based on a relatively small prompt. So, if you ask it, what's the capital of the United States, ChatGPT will give you a detailed summary, sometimes too detailed for what you're looking for. But you can prompt it and guide it appropriately. And it's quite amazing what these technologies can do, but at the same time, it's important to realize that they are not magic. They are not some kind of supernatural apparition that we're dealing with here. These are just this is just software that we're interacting with. And so the principles that apply normally in organizations of maintaining data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, complying with regulations, preserving user privacy, these things don't go away. And it's important to realize that this is just another iteration of these challenges that we've had previously. It's, there are going to be huge advantages in terms of productivity for enterprises, but the underlying requirements from a cybersecurity perspective have not changed. The way you need to implement them have, right, but the basics remain.
So with your job, posing those vulnerability risks and being able to help manage that with different companies and ensuring that we're compliant, how challenging is it when ChatGPT, all of these generative artificial intelligence forms, they're rapidly, emerging and changing and growing? How challenging does that make your role?
Yeah, it makes it very challenging because unfortunately, security teams are often lagging behind other business units when it comes to implementing new technologies. And we've seen organizations take steps like just banning the use of tools like ChatGPT, which is something of a knee-jerk reaction. And as we've seen with other technologies, if you just ban certain tools, people are going to get around it, and you're just going to have what's known as shadow IT on your hands, which is essentially unmanaged apps that people are putting company data into. So what you really need to do is have a consolidated, consistent, and logical framework for using these new technologies rather than just saying ban it, because you'll get some compliance on the surface from your employee base, but you're probably not going to last very long. And if you successfully crack down on these tools enough that no one's using them, then you're going to get left behind by competitors.
Well, and part of, I think, the reality with that is while you might ban it, you may also be missing out on some of the many advantages that artificial intelligence can offer your company. So will you walk us through, when it comes to this generative AI, what are some of the benefits that you can see companies taking advantage of?
Yeah, so there are basically unlimited advantages you can use with generative AI, or you can leverage with generative AI. The biggest one for me is processing unstructured data. So most of the information that knowledge workers deal with on a daily basis is unstructured. It's emails, it's Slack messages, it's even images in some cases. And for a long time, a lot of people's jobs involve just taking information from one format and putting it into another format, whether that's an email into a spreadsheet into an email. And there have been some advances in terms of automation that have made this easier with no-code tools. But with generative AI, that just takes those tasks and makes them trivial. It's extremely easy to do those types of things that would have required someone who knows how to use a computer a long period of time to execute manually. It can be done a lot more quickly, and that's the primary advantage, is really going from structured to unstructured, and vice versa as well. You can use ChatGPT's code interpreter to do really impressive stuff when it comes to data visualization, to explaining data. So you can take some of the things that were done by highly skilled and, most importantly, highly paid people, and you can automate them much more effectively than you could even just a year ago.
I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this is it is all these really high level ideas. And because you're able to feed this to ChatGPT or generative AI, it's then able to regurgitate and potentially share that information with other people, which can be a huge advantage, but then it can also really put companies at risk. So can you walk us through some of the disadvantages that utilizing a tool like this may pose, for a company?
Yeah. Sure. So there are a set of old challenges and there are a set of new challenges when it comes to generative AI tools. The old challenges should be pretty familiar. For example, if you're storing data with a third party, whether it be OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Azure, you're relying on that third party to secure and protect your data. That's nothing new. That's a supply chain security risk that everyone in the modern economy really needs to deal with. There's no way you're really going to get around that if you're running a modern business of any type. I mean, you could conceivably build your own computers, build your own software, but no one does that because it's prohibitively expensive. You don't have the know-how to do it, so you need to rely on other parties. The key is doing proper vetting of them, making sure that they are protecting your information appropriately, understanding what their data retention policies are. But this is just another area where you need to apply that third-party risk management approach. And it's not especially different with generative AI. And some companies, for example, OpenAI, have pretty good, in my opinion, data retention policies. They only keep the information you pass via the API, the application programming interface, for 30 days, where other companies like Google Workspace, they'll keep your information from 2 to 6 months even after you delete it. So you need to just look at those policies, those data retention rules, and make sure that they align with your company risk tolerance. And then you also need to make sure that the company's safeguarding your data appropriately. So that's kind of the old. The new is where it gets a little more complex, but as I mentioned, the basics still are important. So on the confidentiality side, tools like ChatGPT, as you mentioned, their strengths is that they learn from the data that's provided to them. So understanding when and where the information you provide a generative AI tool and whether and how that output is going to be available to other people is critically important. I'll give you some examples. By default, when you log in to ChatGPT, your data, the prompts that you provide, can be trained on by the model. And for example of where this may have come back to bite a company is earlier this year, there was a news article that Amazon engineers had been using ChatGPT, and then had someone else in the company who was using ChatGPT to prepare to interview someone, and saw that ChatGPT was actually providing extremely good answers to Amazon's developer interview questions. So that would imply that the model had learned so quickly and so well from others inputting Amazon code into it that it could then answer these interview questions almost perfectly. Now, none of this has been confirmed, and Amazon, is not stated that this happened, but this is certainly something that could happen. So what you need to do—
That would be really nice to have going into your next job interview, wouldn't it? Just the whole list of kind of job functions, questions you might have. I mean, it's brilliant in that aspect, but you're so right in that it's also potentially sharing some information that could be harmful for the company to get out.
Right, and then also kind of at an even more abstract level, say your company has some process, some technology, or you've solved some problem in a novel way that is really impressive and that no one else knows about. And if you submit that solution to ChatGPT, you've taught ChatGPT how to solve this problem, and you might have just solved this problem for all of your competitors when they might have been struggling with it. So that's a potential danger there. But there are controls you can put in place, like I mentioned. Using the application programming interface for OpenAI, by default, it does not train on your data. So you need to trust OpenAI that they're telling the truth there, but you're going to need to trust someone to hold your data if you're going to use third-party services. So you can do things like pre-processing the data. I have written an open source library that companies can add into their applications that takes data that's submitted into generative AI tools and scrubs out things like IP addresses, application programming key, interface programming keys, credentials, names even. There are libraries that identify personally identifiable information like social security numbers, addresses, things like that, and can identify them and remove them before they're provided to these tools. Because just like on the intellectual property side, there are also privacy concerns. If you're submitting all this personal data and the model's learning based on it, it could be learning sensitive information about you, or even intuiting things that you didn't necessarily tell the model, but it figured out from the other data that you provided it.
I think it's interesting to think about how, if I were in high school needing to rewrite, a paper today, how much easier it would be to potentially get that information using these generative AI tools and different threats that it can pose to all sorts of industries. But especially when it comes to cybersecurity, there's really nothing more important than being able to ensure that your data is secure. That kind of leads into where you come in with StackAware, and I know that you've created a checklist. So can you walk us through what is this checklist called, and why did you create something like this?
Yeah, so I think something that organizations need to start with is having a policy for using generative AI. And some folks have said, no, you just need to add it to your acceptable use policy, or you need to tweak some other policies. I think you do need to tweak them, but I think this is a big enough advancement that it needs its own policy. So, I've developed a draft template that organizations can use for free to help build out their programs. I'm happy to show it up on the screen.
Okay, so this is super helpful. So this is a tool that other companies can use when they're starting to write up their own policies on using generative AI, because again, it's not that it's always a bad thing. There are definitely advantages to it, but it's being able to do it in that really smart way. So walk us through this checklist and how we can help implement something like this.
Yeah, so the key piece here is that what I would call the key advisors of the company when it comes to cyber risk, the chief information security officer, privacy officer, and general counsel need to come together and essentially develop a catalog of tools that are authorized for use within the organization, such that employees understand where they can input data into Gen AI tools and where they can't. And then also certifying specific tools for certain purposes. So if you're just browsing the web and you find some cool chatbot, you probably shouldn't be dumping proprietary information from your company into it. But if you have a certified, if you develop your own LLM internally, or you have, you've done an evaluation of a third-party service like OpenAI, and you've decided that it's within your risk tolerance, then it might make sense to use that for certain purposes. If you're going to be, just asking a chatbot general questions, if you're asking it to do math or things like that, you might be able to be a little less constrained than if you're providing it with your source code, or especially if you're providing any sort of personally identifiable or health information to the chatbot or to the model. And this policy basically requires the organization to lay all that out, to put rules in the road before proceeding.
Wow. I mean, it's so detailed. It's so helpful to be able to have this. For I think so many companies and anybody really, when it comes to new technology, it can be really nerve-wracking. There can even be some intimidation or fear. What is your reaction to those maybe so intimidated by this new technology that their initial reaction is just to shut it out?
Yeah, I would say that approach will work for a couple months, a couple years, but
Yeah.
you're going to be left behind if you maintain that approach consistently, because this technology is game changing and it's going to revolutionize the way people do work. And if you are going to sit on your hands, then other people are not. They're going to be moving fast. So you need a way to protect your organization, protect your employees, your customers, while at the same time leveraging it for good. And this policy helps. It's not a silver bullet. There's still going to be risk, as there is with any technology that you're using. But using some common sense, and potentially more than common sense controls, you'll be able to manage that risk in a reasonable way. Some things that are specific to generative AI that I think this policy calls out and is important is aggregation risk. So something that you wouldn't see normally, or you wouldn't think of as being a problem, is if you have little pieces of data out there, or you're posting it on social media from a company perspective, maybe you mentioned this feature, that feature, maybe you described an internal process. If a human looks at those, it might be very difficult to intuit any sort of proprietary data from those statements. But generative AI is, can combine that with basically an entire humanity's worth of knowledge, and potentially come up with some pretty detailed information about the inner workings of your company that you might not want anyone else to know. So aggregation risk is something that you should definitely consider when you are publishing information and or using generated by AI tools directly.
So when somebody is starting to implement this policy, how do you think it's best to start communicating this with the rest of their team? Is it just, the mass email, or how can you train an entire team to really be able to use this to the best of their advantage?
Yeah, so the mass email will be necessary, but certainly not sufficient. My viewpoint is that security teams need to enable other business units to get their job done securely, rather than saying, we are going to prevent or eliminate all cyber risk, which is impossible. You need to have the mindset of, we're going to make this happen securely. So a policy is a starting point, but some other things that organizations can implement would be a standard operating procedure, which I'll show here. Did my screen over? So this is much more detailed. This is the blocking and tackling, where you get the exact details of, hey, okay, somebody wants to use an AI system. What's the step? Okay, you need to enter into this database so that we're tracking it. We have an asset inventory. We know that someone wants to use this. Then we need to do a business analysis. Is this tool more cost effective than a non-AI tool? If so, then we need to move on to do an external review with other stakeholders outside the company potentially. If we pass that, then we're going to do a privacy review to make sure that we're treating and handling personal data appropriately. So all this type of stuff, it's very complex and it requires a structured approach. A mass email is a start, but it's certainly not a finish. And you're going to need to war game. You're going to need to drill this type of procedure into your team effectively, and you're going to need to also prepare for incidents to happen, because any compliance program that has 100% success rate isn't really a compliance program, because it's clearly not catching anything and perfect. So having a plan to protect your company data and then respond if it's put at risk is going to be critical, and that's a continuous process. You're never done with cybersecurity.
How important is it really to be able to set up these policies and these standards? Are they actually that necessary, or can it just be as easy as being like, hey guys, make sure we're really careful with all this cool generative AI stuff. Make sure you don't do, you're not sharing any of our company's more private policies or intelligence. How important is it really?
Yeah, I'd say you need to go below the surface level, because saying be as secure as possible or be smart or things like that are well-intentioned. And actually, I've had quite a bit of criticism for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, because they often say things like, be as secure as possible, or security is a top priority. Yes, that's quite easy to say, but when you get to the sharp end, when someone needs to accomplish his or her job, that person needs to make trade-offs, needs to decide, am I going to enter this information into this tool or am I not? And you need very clear boundaries, especially if you're going to try to hold someone accountable in the end. If you have just vague guidelines about, hey, be smart with Gen AI, and then you try to fire someone because he put some data into a tool while he was trying to do his job, I mean, you might be able to do it, but that's not going to create a good working environment. That's going to hurt morale, because people don't understand what the lanes in the road are. So you need to be specific and say, this type of data is authorized for this tool, this type of data is not. And you need to automate that as much as possible, because you don't want to make people try to remember things as they're going through their daily tasks. You want to remove as much cognitive load as possible to make the job as easy as possible and make people more productive. So automating things like with the data pre-processing tools that I mentioned, like GPT Guard, using maybe a commercial tool, potentially even bringing your own in-house large language model into play might be appropriate, depending on the sensitivity of the data that you're managing. But then again, you've got the risk, the technical risk of managing your own LLM if you're not an AI or a tech company. That's pretty challenging. And then also you've got the there's security risk as well. If you're managing something in Amazon Web Services, just because you're managing it doesn't mean it's necessarily more secure than a software as a service product, where the developer of that knows how it runs, how to configure it appropriately, and maybe only exposes the key things to the customer. Whereas if you're managing everything yourself, it might be less secure because you don't necessarily know what you're doing.
It feels like with the emergence of this generative AI that we're just beginning to kind of scratch the surface, where people are really starting to finally dig in and see the benefits, the disadvantages that it can pose, and the risks for their company. So when it comes to starting to introduce that policy, how often do you think we should look at that policy and ensure that we're still adhering to that? Or when and if the technology continues to evolve, we can update it?
Yeah, I'd say at this point for policy, you should probably be looking quarterly at it to see if there are major changes in the way the technology is developing, because things are moving so quickly right now. And then as far as individual tools, you should probably go at least yearly, do a reassessment of the risk, make sure that your systems, your controls in place are appropriate for the data that you're processing, make sure your business processes and operations haven't shifted radically. Otherwise, you can't check it every day, because then people will get burned out and it'll become kind of a check in the box. But having a good cadence for refreshing the policy definitely makes sense, at least at this juncture. And I don't think things are going to be slowing down too much.
No, I don't think so either. And before we kind of dig in further to GPT Guard and what that can do for us, I want everyone to know like this is a real problem that many companies can face, and many have already been kind of under fire in ways where they may have had information leak out. Can you illustrate a couple of examples where using that artificial intelligence, that generative AI, did kind of put somebody or a company in a negative position?
Yeah, so companies are hesitant to confirm these types of incidents for.
I don't blame them.
Yeah. So Amazon, that's one example. Another is Samsung reportedly had several employees provide proprietary source code as well as confidential meeting notes into ChatGPT. The consequences of that, aside from the reputation costs, are not immediately clear. I'm not sure, Lenovo or whoever Samsung's biggest competitor is went in there and was able to pull that information out, because the news reporting has been somewhat vague about it. But that's an example. And then tons of companies, Apple, JP Morgan, Chase, Verizon, have banned or put restrictions on the use of ChatGPT based on these concerns. I think in some cases they may be competitive. For example, Apple apparently has its own internal tool that it doesn't want its employees using another tech company's software. And then JP Morgan obviously deals with lots of confidential client information, financial data. Verizon has customer information. So, they're playing it safe. I would say in one sense, they're reducing the risk of exposure through this avenue, but they're taking on risks as well in terms of being left behind by their competitors who are maybe a little more risk accepting. And, it's not for me to say what the right approach is. If that's a business decision, how risk accepting are you going to be within legal and ethical boundaries? But, when you take those out of play, there's still a lot of gray area, and some companies might be reasonably more accepting of the risk than others based on their culture and their objectives.
Awesome. So one of the things I thought was really fascinating as I was starting to dig a little bit deeper into generative AI is that obviously it could be a really powerful tool when it came to taking large points of data and condensing it down. But another thing I thought would be really fascinating is it able then to, because it can identify, say, phishing emails easier, is it also something then that can be dangerous when it comes to a sophisticated hacker who wants to utilize that information to create their own phishing email?
Yeah, definitely. Pretty much any technology is just a tool, and it can be a double-edged tool. So there are plenty of use cases for artificial intelligence for security, and there are plenty of instances of using artificial intelligence for nefarious purposes, like creating phishing emails. I think there was some data earlier this year. There was a big increase in phishing emails that one vendor saw. I think it was over 100% increase, and that's potentially due to the use of generative AI tools. I know OpenAI in particular has put in safeguards to make sure people aren't using their software to design malware and things like that. But there are definitely problems. Some other issues that have sprung up are there is a problem that's become pretty well known with LLMs, which is hallucinations, essentially generating fake information or incorrect information. And software developers have been using LLMs to help them code. And sometimes the LLM will generate a library name that looks correct, but actually isn't. So for example, if you go if you're in Python and you type, import GPT guard, then you'll get my library and you'll be able to use it. And obviously I designed it, to not be malicious. But if you misspell guard, it's quite possible that you pull in a different library that maybe somebody evil created specifically to exfiltrate data, to pull that sensitive data out of your organization. And what we've seen is ChatGPT will hallucinate library names, and it's doing so somewhat consistently. So attackers figured this out and started creating libraries that match the name of those hallucinations. So developers who are using ChatGPT might see it call a library and then actually be able to import that library. But that library was specifically created to take advantage of the hallucination and steal data from an organization. So that's one of those new threats that people were kind of aware of. You know, typo squatting was fairly common beforehand, but this is a new attack vector that is created by generative AI.
You know, it's just such a vast concept. What are some of the questions that you get most often from companies looking to support and boost up their compliance system?
Yeah, usually the questions I get are of the binary sort, like, is this secure or is this compliant? And like I said, there's always going to be a lot of gray area here. You know, I'll give an example. The European General Data Protection Regulation, which was passed or enacted in 2018, has some pretty stringent requirements regarding how you process personal data. And a lot of people are looking very hard at that and the implications with generative AI, but there are a lot of unanswered questions. So I'll give this example, which I continue to ask all the people that I know and respect in the space, and I haven't gotten a good answer. You know, I mentioned generative AI tools can predict things about people even without knowing them and without even having the data being in a
Wow.
database like that. So what are the GDPR implications if ChatGPT can predict my home address? You know, that may not be stored in their database anywhere, but you know, if it knows what town I live in or it knows, you know, where my relatives are, it might be able to predict my address. So if I file a data deletion request under the GDPR, you know, there's no data in the database. It's just the model will produce that response based on its training data. Do you need to make the model produce incorrect information? Do you need to make it, you know, refuse to answer the question? But you know, the data would still need to be in there somewhere. You need a rule to prevent the model from providing that response. So I think there are going to be even more gray areas when it comes to compliance. And those types of questions, I think I'm getting those, and I'm going to continue to get those as things accelerate.
You know, it's, I think, a really exciting place to be with technology. You know, what are, you know, just some of your final thoughts as companies are kind of under fire in this position, learning so much? It is overwhelming, but if you can just sum it up, what would you say?
I would say it's not magic. Treat it like any other technology. Have a structured approach for doing so. Keep abreast of the latest developments and use sound risk management principles whenever you're considering using a new tool.
Awesome. And Walter, before we wrap up, I know one of the things that you wanted to share is if anybody had wanted to learn any more information, you're actually going to be conducting a cohort on this.
Yes, yeah. So I'm working with a chief information security officer for a major government agency, and we are putting together a live cohort where we're basically going to give the playbook for developing a AI governance program. So we're going to take all the tools that I showed you here and more, and we're going to go through in excruciating detail through all the attack vectors, all the compliance risks, and help build a playbook that's ready to drop into any organization to help them manage AI risk. And I'll throw that up on the screen just so folks can take a look at it. Yeah, if you go to maven.com/harnessai/AI security, that will get you to the page, and I'll definitely send over a link to this for folks that are interested. And we've got a bunch of free resources, some that I've shown, some that I haven't, for folks that are interested in AI security and learning more about it.
You know, we will have all of those links provided. So if you are joining us here on the webinar, or if you're listening to this on a podcast, we're going to be able to share all of those resources along with you. But Walter, I do want to say thank you so much for joining us today here with Kirkpatrick Price in this webinar. We know that when it comes to threats, our clients do want to make sure that they're ready. And one way to do that is through thorough testing with cybersecurity compliance and audits. So just make sure, test with a certified expert who's able to include those controls with generative artificial intelligence and what that can pose in the workplace. Walter, I hope that today's discussion was fun for you. I know it was a lot of fun for me, and I hope it was informative to everybody joining us at home. So thank you so much, and I look forward to chatting with you again, hopefully sometime later.
Well, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Thanks, Walter.
When you work with a KirkpatrickPrice cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the risks and policy considerations associated with new AI technology so that companies can understand how AI can help them, but also some of the risks posed by some of these new technologies. So I'll go over some of the policy considerations and also some risk assessment activities that will help your company prepare for this emerging technology and to help understand how it can help and potentially hurt your business. So in terms of policy considerations, I wanted to start by just considering the idea of adding a policy guideline into your information security policy that discusses the types of AI tools that are approved. Now, this is an important aspect of management control because you want your workforce to be able to use AI to benefit, but also you want to have that management control of saying which AI tools should be approved and that your employees don't use any AI tool just off the street without management approval. Another thing is the importance of ensuring that you're not inputting sensitive information into the AI tool. So this should work in conjunction with your data classification policies, where you look at the type of data you have within your company and classify it based on criticality and based on the level of security that you want to apply. So data that could be considered sensitive within your company, like PHI or PII, should not be entered into an AI tool. And you should be able to list this type of data within your policy so that employees know which types of data should not be placed into the AI tool. Another element of policy consideration is the idea of not treating the AI tools as infallible. You want to understand that this is a machine generating this information, and so with that, you should understand that there should be a human element that verifies the accuracy of this information that is being generated so that you're not sharing biased information that may not be correct, and then all of a sudden your data set is totally ruined by bad information. Another item is that any personnel should be able to report to the CISO or the head of security any type of red flag associated with the AI's behavior. If it's not behaving in the way that you think it should be behaving, you want to be able to report that so that an investigation can be conducted and can be resolved in an amicable way so that no critical information is entered into the AI tool. Another policy item is the importance of ensuring that when you use generative AI tools, you should be as transparent as possible with your coworkers, with your colleagues, with clients about ensuring that these people know that this is in fact generative AI content being generated, and so that there's a degree of transparency among the company of what information is AI generated and what information is generated by a person, just so there's understanding and a degree of accountability with this information, and that a human person can review it for accuracy and technical detail. And now, as with any new emerging technology, you want to be able to incorporate AI into your risk assessment. So your risk assessment should be at least an annual activity in which you document and analyze the type of risks that your company is facing, and in the new age that we're entering, AI should be incorporated into that risk assessment. So I will talk a little bit in this next section about some of those risks and kind of how to deal with them. Just since this is a new, powerful, and emerging tool, we want to be able to have as much risk assessment information as we can concerning the use of AI. Now, one of the risk assessment items you should be thinking about is the fact that some degree of bias can affect the AI output. For example, if you're handling loans for an organization and this organization takes information that is biased against certain groups, then suddenly your data set has an ingrained bias into it, and you don't want that. You want to be able to have a totally unbiased, totally fair data set that you're working with that's free from the type of errors that AI could potentially lead you to. Another risk assessment item would be the threat of data exposure. You want to be able to have controls in place to ensure that the type of information that you put into an AI tool, especially sensitive information, cannot be exposed to a potential bad actor. So this involves, as I mentioned earlier, documenting the type of information that are allowed to be put into an AI tool, and also just ensuring that personnel are aware that information they put into an AI tool could one day be made public. Another very important risk assessment item is the fact that an AI system can't be accountable to human beings. It's the human beings who must be able to take accountability for the types of outputs that we see through AI systems. So at the end of the day, there should be human beings making decisions about how data is shared, how information is collected, how generative AI is used within your organization, in order to ensure that there is a human trail that allows investigators or any other personnel to understand that it's, at the end of the day, is a human being making these types of decisions. And those are some of the risk considerations and policy considerations associated with this new emerging AI technology.
If you want to prepare for success with regulatory compliance, visit KirkpatrickPrice.com/podcast or the show notes to download today's episode resources. We're here to empower you to face your cybersecurity and compliance challenges. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at KirkpatrickPrice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.